Hello and welcome to Sig Mechanics. This shortcuts video will show you how to replace the Sear springs on the P320 without having to disassemble the entire FCU. This technique is simple but might require some knowledge of how the P320 functions in order for you to understand what you're doing. Begin by lifting the slide catch to disengage the takedown lever system if necessary. And with a finger over the Sear, use a pin punch to extract the safety lever pivot pin. Use a fine tip tool to compress the takedown safety lever bar's spring, and with the spring compressed, lift the takedown lever bar up but not all the way out, only enough that the leg on the takedown bar keeps the internal spring compressed when you release it. Take note that the next step will remove the only thing holding the Sear in place, so proceed with caution so you don't lose your Sear springs. With a finger holding down the Sear, grip the rear end of the trigger bar and lift it and rest the back leg of the trigger bar onto the Sear housing. Keep in mind that if you have an aftermarket trigger, you might need to remove the trigger assembly altogether or move the trigger bar leg behind the Sear housing due to a different geometry. You can now slowly release the pressure on the Sear springs, and with your fingers or a tool, you can lift and pivot the Sear out of the Sear housing. As you can see, one of my Sear springs is crushed, and therefore we will replace both of them with new ones. Extract the damaged Sear spring and place a little grease on the pins molded on the Sear and press fit the new Sear springs in place. You can now rotate the Sear while guiding the Sear springs with your finger back into the Sear housing. Keep a finger over the Sear and put downward pressure. Meanwhile, you can maneuver the trigger bar back into the housing. If you have the trigger bar resting on the Sear housing, you can try to simply pull the trigger to drop it back in place. Keeping your finger on the Sear still, and with a fine tip tool, compress the takedown safety lever bar's spring and push the takedown lever bar back into the FCU. Lift the slide catch lever while pulling back on the takedown lever bar so that it locks in the back position. Use a pin punch to align the through holes for the safety lever pivot pin. Insert and press the pivot pin all the way through. Push up on the slide catch lever to release the takedown safety lever bar. Now you can test for function by pulling the trigger. And you have successfully changed the Sear springs on the P320 without disassembling the whole unit.